All right. Welcome everyone to our DPI Arts Education Team's Making Lemonade series. We are doing these content-specific PLCs for you because we know that you are busy planning and trying to prepare for the fall. So welcome to today's session, which is Fine Arts Remote Learning Strategies. On this page here, you'll see, actually go back one moment, Brandon. I just want to make sure everybody sees quickly. So we have all these buttons down at the bottom of this first page. All of those are hyperlinked to our website, our Facebook page. All of that information you can just click when you get to this, when you go to this bit.ly and you click on this slide, you can go directly to all of those links down there. So I just want to make sure you know where those are and that those are hyperlinked in there for you to be able to access at any time. All right, so welcome again. Like I said, my name is Sayward Grinley. I am the Dance and Visual Arts Consultant here at DPI. I started at the end of May, so I have been learning all of this remotely and just really diving in head first. And so it's been 2 months now that I've been on this team with my partner, Brandon, and I'll introduce him in just a moment. But I just wanted to say thank you. It's been really amazing to meet all of you, and we're really excited to see what we can do to help you out this year. So I'm going to turn it over to my team member, Brandon.
Hi, I am your music and theater arts consultant, and I have just been with you since the beginning of October. And we are super stoked to have our guest speaker here today because she is much more knowledgeable about these things than we are.
And then our section chief, Dr. Lori Major Carlin, I don't believe is with us today, but she is really our driving force and fearless leader in all of this. She oversees the two of us in the arts team and also the social studies team. And she has really done quite a bit for us. And she's a former theater arts teacher. So she's another person you can reach out to if you need anyone. Let's make sure that we're muted as we're coming in. And then I'm going to let our guest today introduce herself. We have Kelly joining us from Virginia, and she's going to say a little bit about who she is.
Well, hello, and it's a joy to be with you this afternoon. Thank you for taking some time out of your Friday to be together. I'm Kelly Bisogno. I'm the coordinator of fine arts for the Virginia Department of Education, so your neighbor to the north. I was an art teacher for 10 years prior to my position here, where I taught in a regular classroom full-time for digital media and graphic design, 3D design, and Art 1. And then for half of that time, I developed and taught online art classes, which is an experience that I want to share with you today. So I'm looking forward to being with you.
Thank you, Kelly. We're so excited to have you here with us. A few housekeeping things quickly. This is DPI facilitated, so we have put all of these together for you. Your video is encouraged so we can see your face, but not necessarily necessary or required. We're going to try to make sure that everybody stays on topic in the chat, but your questions are encouraged. And thoughts and any ideas or extra resources that you come up with, you can feel free to put those in the chat as well. We will be monitoring that, and we will send you everything. So we will keep track of everything that gets put in the chat. We'll put those at the notes at the end of this slide deck so that you have those with you to come back and reference. We try to stay solutions focused. So while we know you have lots of questions and concerns, we really try to stay positive and see how we can come up with creative solutions for things. And most importantly, make sure that you self-mute. If you're having trouble hearing, we have turned on closed captioning so that you can hopefully read along with what we are saying. And we are videotaping this or recording it, and it will be up on our webinar with all of our previous, or on our website with our previous webinars. So you can access that at any time later. If you take a look at this slide here, it'll show you where you can unmute yourself or mute yourself on that little red button. You can also change the layout at the top of your tab there so that you can see more people or less people. And you want to make sure you can find the chat down below. because we will be using the chat quite a bit. All right, we're going to go over a couple of things today. So we'll start with just a quick overview of arts ed in North Carolina and a quick overview of remote learning best practices. And then we'll turn it over to Kelly to dive more deeply into fine arts remote learning strategies. And then we'll follow up with a closure and how you can get your survey and your certificate for today's participation. Our webinar goals today are to gain confidence in teaching the North Carolina Essential Standards for Arts remotely and online, understand the instructional framework and foundation for remote instruction, and to gain familiarity with various learning management systems and how you can use those in your arts education context, and really mostly to get ideas and strategies, tools, resources from Kelly and from your colleagues as well. And you'll see quite a bit of resources, state and nationally, that can offer additional support to you if needed.
All right. We seem to have quite a few people who are having some trouble with their audio. And I will say that the people who are having trouble with it look like they're not fully connected using computer audio. There are 3 dots in there are multiple buttons down at the bottom of your screen, and one of them is 3 dots. If you click on that and click on your audio options, you should be able to choose connecting with the computer for sound, and then hopefully you'll be able to connect. Unfortunately, I'm realizing you may not be able to hear me say that, so hopefully Sayward will be able to type that in. So just for some people who may be teaching for the first time in North Carolina or not familiar with all that we do here, we're going to go through just a few facts about us. We have 386 public school units in North Carolina public schools, much different than the 100 that we used to have, just one per county, not very long ago. We have 2,500 public schools, which serve 1.55 million public school students. And of those schools and teachers, we have 4 arts areas. We do not cover media arts in the state. And we have 7,026 arts teachers. I just pulled that data down from our reporting system. So it is quite amazing that we are supporting so many teachers. If you know anybody else who can benefit from these webinars, please make sure that you pass them on. One exciting thing is we do have the newly required or legislated arts credit for graduation. If you are familiar with an arts credit for graduation, that has been a local decision or a local requirement in your LEA, and yay, but now we have one that's across the entire state. So we're very excited about that change. North Carolina Art is based on the comprehensive arts education model, which was built after Senate Bill 66's Comprehensive Arts Education Task Force in 2010 discovered that the 3 components of arts education, or well-balanced arts education, include arts integration and arts exposure as well. If you are not very familiar with comprehensive arts education, please do feel free to click on that link here, and it will take you to our Google site and teach you all about the great work that has been done in that area across the past decade. Just wanted to point out some other professional development that's coming up. This is the rest of our series. And we've got all sorts of things coming up. Next Tuesday, we will be working with the North Carolina Museum of Art. And that would be great for any non-arts teachers, especially elementary non-arts teachers that you know to participate in as well. So please help encourage some arts integration by inviting them along to that as well. And then next week, we will also cover Pear Deck specifically for arts education. NCVPS also is doing some digital talks about meaningful feedback in the remote setting. So there's part 1 and part 2 next week, and they are at 10 and 9 a.m. So They will not conflict with any of ours. Again, you can access all of these registration links just by typing in the bit.ly down at the bottom. NCACDA has their online conference coming up very soon, so they were kind enough to share their information that you can come back to. And NCMEA are also putting together a free webinar, 8 webinars that are specifically geared towards the music teacher, but they definitely cover content that would be applicable in any of the arts areas. So we wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the life as the remote teacher. If you did not hear that the Friday Institute has put together a remote learning MOOC, I highly recommend that you check it out because it is pretty fantastic and goes very in depth into what is actually going to be best for our students and practical for teachers as well. They built their MOOC on the framework right here that has these 7 core principles. And you'll notice that social and emotional learning is a big part of that. And we all know that the arts speak very strongly to that. This was published on April 7th of this past year. So if you were blessed enough to have access to it and apply it to your classroom, I know it was very efficient and meaningful for your students. If you are unfamiliar with it, I highly recommend it. There's both a 1-pager and a longer full document that really speaks to all 7 of these core principles. Also, there is a recommendations for instructional leaders. So if you feel that your instructional leaders might benefit from a framework for supporting their teachers, you can definitely pass that along as well. Oh no, I didn't mean to click on that. All right. And then the last thing I really wanted to say was that we are on the verge of a pedagogical renaissance. Instead of just doing what we've always done, we can attack this and try things that we have never had the opportunity, the time, the space, the technology to really try new things. Even if this is your 35th year teaching, it might feel like your first year teaching. And if we can muster up enough excitement, like for our first year teaching, I know that we can all be very successful. All right. And then involving students as solving or problem solvers. They are incredibly great at being able to solve these seemingly impossible solutions. And if we're looking for materials, especially as visual arts teachers, include them in that process. What kitchen liquids can they paint with? We can do it. We know this is a temporary solution. This is not an education crisis. This is a health crisis. And we know that we will be able to come back out on top on the other side of this. So without any further ado, Kelly is going to tell you how we can come out on top.
All right, if you can go to the next slide, I'm going to take a moment to address why I started teaching online. There's the slide that says why there. I think you're on the next tab. There we go. I'll be the first to tell you that the best place for fine arts students is to be together in person with a teacher. I didn't get started in this work because I thought students should move their art classes online. I started it because I was seeing subgroups of students who were not succeeding in a traditional school day and were finding their way to online classes. These were the same students who often loved art and thrived in the art room, but some were moving online because of struggles with mental and physical health, with severe anxiety and depression, or because they were having children. Students in my online courses were often trying to recover final credits toward graduation because of a variety of challenges or missteps on the path to graduation. I looked at these kids and I said, if these kids are moving to online education, then I'm going too, because they won't have art otherwise, and they deserve to have the opportunity for a meaningful arts class. I don't think there is anyone that will tell you that teaching an art course online is better than in-person class instruction, but I'm here to tell you that it is possible to provide authentic and meaningful fine arts instruction online. And I'm going to share the lessons I learned in 5 years of developing and teaching online classes. I'm going to start off with a framework for approaching remote instruction, and then I'll provide a sample structure, then some specific examples from lessons and systems from my own class and my own students. I believe that this framework can be used in any classroom, but especially a fine arts classroom of music, theater, dance, and visual arts. The strategies that will be covered in this webinar are not about how to use Canvas or Schoology or Google Classroom to place classroom activities online. The strategies in this webinar are about developing the framework for how relationships can be built and how student growth can be achieved in virtual and blended learning. And the next slide, as you look at this list of strategies for how to promote success with remote learning, I hope that you find that this list looks familiar, because if it does, it's because these strategies are what make a successful remote teacher or an in-class teacher. In fact, when virtual schools hire teachers, they don't look for online teaching experience because they say, we can teach you how to teach online. They look for teachers with successful in-person classroom experience. And I hope that that gives you some confidence in knowing that your success with virtual and blended learning is not about the apps you know or the cool technology out there. The good news here is that you already know how to build relationships, how to create systems and structures for learning. And when you start to build your remote learning strategies, you'll start from that knowledge and not the technology knowledge and not what cool websites are out there. In our rush to support students at the beginning of the pandemic, we focused a lot on giving students and families resources and activities, sometimes without adjusting how our relationships, our routines, and our structures work in this new system of learning. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to go over these 5 strategies, and the first is to create a climate based on culture, create a climate and culture based on trust. And next. An optimal classroom climate for learning is one that generates an atmosphere of trust. And in John Hattie's book, Visible Learning for Teachers, he says that this trust is between students and teachers, but also between students and students. Next. Students want to trust in your class that they will be seen and heard, that they can be successful in whatever kind of environment they're faced with. They want to know that the teacher is there to assist and can be responsive to questions. And they want to trust that people are bullied.
Kelly, hold on one second. So we're
Sure.
still getting a few people not muted, and we're getting some feedback. So just kind reminder to please stay muted so Kelly can continue. Thanks, Kelly.
All right, next slide. For this type of learning, empathy is key, and that extends to both students and families who may be experiencing a wide variety of challenges. An empathetic teacher is one that is assuming that all families and students are doing the best that they can in their current situation. In the article from Edutopia, How to Teach with Empathy in Distance Learning, I'm going to share a quote on the next slide. Says that quite simply, this is not the time to tighten up our expectations, to become upset about student participation, to wallow in irritation with parents, or criticize our colleagues. We can balance relationships and accountability, extending graceful practices such as modifying assignments, adjusting expectations, and conducting alternative assessments based on each situation. So in summary, the strategies for success for creating a classroom culture for remote learning is to, of course, start by getting to know your students, just like you do for the regular school year. And online, you can use surveys and discussion boards and collaborative tools to get to know your students and then help them get to know each other. You can make your classroom a safe place for mistakes by modeling how to give constructive feedback and give students a chance to practice with you. We have to teach all of these new routines and structures for how we communicate online and give students a chance to try it out before we let them loose in the class. We can model how to respond to diverse ideas, opinions, and belief. And this year, more than ever, we need to be prepared for hard conversations around race. And there's a resource called the Talking About Race web portal from the African American Museum of History and Culture that I found particularly helpful in thinking about framing conversations this school year. We can use a live class session to collaboratively develop community agreements to guide virtual class interactions, and we can provide structures for building a class community and positive relationships. The next strategy is that we create systems and structures that support all students. Equity goes beyond ensuring that every student has access to technology. The next question to ask ourselves is whether we've created a system and a structure for learning that enables all students to learn and grow. In his book, We Got This, Cornelius Minor says we have to ask ourselves, what systems can we influence right now to be more equitable and just? And the answer is likely to include the systems that govern your own classroom. Disrupting systemic injustice can start with questioning the rules, policies, procedures, and practices and customs that define your classroom culture. You can identify the groups in your classroom that are benefiting less from the way things are, and then change the way that you do school so that kids who belong to those groups have more opportunity to succeed. The quote on the next slide frames this question a little further. He says, what specific things does a child need to do to be successful in this class? And he says, I list them. I might even group them into habits, behaviors, and academic skills. How often? What structures exist to help them do these things consistently? And then he says that this illustrates and shows that the specific criteria for success in my classroom. And in many classrooms, kids simply aren't clear about what they need to know and be able to do in order to be successful. Sometimes they just think they have to do their work or don't make the teacher mad. But thinking about those systems and structures ahead of time give children more control over their success. For me, moving from my systems and structures that were face to face to online learning forced me to examine everything that I did because everything had to be written down and made clear and made plain. And when I started switching my face to face classroom to an online environment, it made me pick apart my routines and my structures. I had to analyze them, I had to test them out and shift them if they weren't working. Evaluating my relationship systems and structures allowed me to narrow down what is essential, what works best, and what methods truly result in student growth and learning, and get rid of what wasn't working. Just as you would in your face-to-face class, we start by establishing norms, routines, and expectations for the virtual or blended learning environment, and then allow students to practice those with you, model them, and allow them to try it out. The first week of my online class was all about learning to be an online student. Students learned and practiced writing an email. They practiced submitting an assignment and seeing the feedback on that assignment. They reviewed the course structure and they were able to ask questions about the class before we started any kind of content or assignments. Next slide. The next important thing as a teacher is to be consistent. Students learn a routine and they know what to expect from week to week. My students knew that I would present an outline on Sunday. They knew that they would have to post to the discussion board by Wednesday, to reply to classmates by Friday, and then submit all assignments by the following Sunday. Because this was a predictable structure and routine from week to week, they were able to adjust and plan their own schedule throughout the week to accommodate that, and they could make it consistent and predictable. It's also important to follow any protocols set by your school division so that it's important not to go rogue. Students can develop that consistency from class to class. My online students also knew that I wasn't always available. I'm a mother of three. I had a full-time job in addition to my online class, so I never promised to be available 24/7. But I did promise that I would be visible, engaged, and present in my office hours. So we can set office hours that help create some of that predictability and make sure that we're responsive within that time. My students know that I would respond to all emails within 24 hours of them sending it to me. We have to communicate regularly with our class. And again, that sort of predictable routine is really helpful. Set office hours instead of being available on demand, and use communication as a way to provide a human connection with students, because human connection is key to building online community and student success. Another part of creating consistency is creating a predictable lesson structure. I'm going to show you mine. The example that I show you should not be taken as, a state lesson plan that you must use. But I want to show you an example because, again, not only did they receive a consistent routine in the schedule from week to week, but each lesson followed a predictable structure and sequence so that they knew how to be successful in each part, and they could learn that in the beginning of the year and then sort of sail with it the rest of the year. And it's always important to remember that we must protect the civil rights of students. The U.S. Department of Education released a webinar on ensuring web accessibility for students with disabilities for schools utilizing online learning, and it's also provided a fact sheet. So I would leave that slide for you there to pay attention to later. So just a summary, how do we establish norms, routines, and expectations for remote learning? We create those routines and structures with equity and inclusion in mind. We clearly communicate those norms, routines, and expectations and allow students to practice them. We set office hours and we're present, visible, and available. And we create a predictable lesson structure. And next. Third is how we communicate effectively in an online environment. Communication is key in virtual learning. We really have to make things plain that we may be able to rely on verbal cues or nonverbal cues or body language in our face-to-face classes. So we have to keep instructions clear and concise. We have to break down complex instructions into smaller steps, and then communicate exactly what students are being asked to know and be able to do by the end of the lesson. And then we communicate the success criteria for the products that students will create. In that same Edutopia article, How to Teach with Empathy in Distance Learning, the author says that in distance learning, there's a danger that teachers may assume that students share the ability to automatically read, interpret, and apply textual information. But this is not always the case. Remote instruction is forcing students to read and process text at an unprecedented level. Students may lack the skills to comprehend our messages, and this impedes their growth in learning. This can also create frustration and overwhelm students. What we can do as educators is to keep things simple, reduce the text demands, and make sure that your students aren't being required to read and process passages of text at a level that they've never had to experience before. So we keep all written communication as clear and concise as possible. There is a fine balance between making your expectations clear and plain and making them wordy. And that can be a hard thing to navigate in the beginning of online learning, but it's important to be as clear and concise as possible. We can provide video directions to accompany text as often as you can. We can offer face-to-face meetings to provide additional support. We can limit email communications, particularly when they're struggling, and try to reach out verbally. Decrease quantity and increase quality, and I can't emphasize that one enough. Be selective with the content you choose to deliver and cut out the things that are superfluous. And then proofread all information to remove teacher jargon, ensure student-friendly language, and remember that our vocabularies are vast compared to those of most of our students. The next slide is about effective videos. Research shows that videos created for online learning should be kept short. The research study linked there says that they should be less than 6 minutes. Our state online learning office has said really 3 to 4 is best for helping protect student bandwidth and connectivity. And so the instructor should keep videos short, but then show their personality and be enthusiastic and be themselves. The research actually shows that in a video, if you are imperfect and you're human and you show yourself in the video, the student outcomes are actually better than students that have a high production quality. Students want a human connection and you provide that. Don't worry about them being perfect. Be your quirky, weird self, stumble over words, adjust yourself, whatever you have to do in a video. It's actually results in better learning that way when you're human. Imagine that. And then keeping videos under 3 and 4 minutes supports students in using technologies and with internet connectivity. And when students need to be longer than that, you can break them down into smaller parts. I will also just give a word of advice about videos. You want to make sure you can use them for many years to come. When we're back in our classrooms next year or whenever that might be, you can use these videos for subplans or to provide remediation or to support students who are homebound. So don't attach specific dates or timelines to your videos in person so that you can use these for year to come. You can maximize your time. So just as some summary of ways for communication success are to keep instructions clear and concise, break down lengthy processes into smaller steps, reduce literacy demands, keep videos short, show your face and personality, and don't worry about it being perfect. And the fourth strategy is all about making assignments meaningful. And you probably have ways that you do this in your face-to-face class, but I want to highlight a few strategies that are all about making meaningful assignments for students. The first, it's already been discussed, but we support social and emotional learning, and there are many resources popping up out there that can help all teachers, and especially arts teachers, and how we help students manage and communicate their feelings and emotions and develop communication skills. Work with students for the development of personal goals and action plans as part of social and emotional learnings. We help students develop their own goals and then find ways to achieve them. And we can pair analysis of the arts with building an emotional vocabulary. And there are several resources I'll point you to on the slide there for the connections between arts and social emotional learning. Scott Edgar, who's literally written the book on music and social emotional learning, says we can encourage students to start with musical analysis by creating a tweet or analyzing a piece using emojis, and it can help them break down barriers and allow students to be more comfortable working with the potentially uncomfortable domain of social and emotional analysis. There are many more examples in his book about ways to pair music and social emotional learning that I find really helpful for all of our arts classes. Next is culturally responsive practices. This is a research-based approach that makes meaningful connections between what students learn in school and their cultures, their languages, and life experiences. These connections help students access rigorous curriculum, help them develop higher level academic skills, and see the relevance between what they learn in school and their lives. I'll point you to one more quote from Cornelius Minor. You can tell I love this book. But he says, before our kids are students, they're people, and people care about other people. They care about ideas, trends, and experiences. And he talks about developing connections to the things that students love. More recently, an article came out by Emil Major, How to Develop Culturally Responsive Teaching for Distance Learning. And I just love this quote from that article. When it comes to distance learning, applying culturally responsive teaching requires remixing education by borrowing from the best practices and how kids learn in a way that repositions the student as the leader of his or her own learning. By giving students more agency, the idea is to disrupt old routines around teaching and learning that make the student dependent on the teacher for receiving knowledge. I think that's really powerful. And one of the benefits of online learning is that some of the power and control is given to the student to direct their own path. And that can be really exciting.
I was just going to jump in here and say that
Yeah.
if anybody hasn't already taken a look at the upcoming webinars, Matthew Holt is going to be doing a whole webinar on self-regulated learners that really speaks to this. So if this is something that interests you, definitely check that out. Thanks.
Awesome. I think we've all heard about project-based learning, but I'll just highlight some resources there, especially at the bottom. There is some resources specifically for fine arts teachers on the PBL Works website. And then there are the first link there is PBL for remote learning. The project-based learning group has opened up a whole portal of resources about project-based learning for remote and distance learning. So I would encourage you to take a look if you're interested in incorporating project-based learning practices in your class for this year. Creating art is more than personal expression. It is a way of investigating, evaluating, and representing the world. That's an article from the author who was talking about the arts in project-based learning. The other kind of promising practice I'm a little more curious about, I didn't know about this when I was teaching, but I've been really interested in exploring place-based learning. And it's basically saying, how can you utilize where the student is in this place and time as a jumping off point for learning experiences? So it takes advantage of geography to create authentic, meaningful, and engaging personalized learning for students. More specifically, place-based education is defined as an immersive learning experience that places students in local heritage, cultures, landscapes, opportunities, and experiences, and using those as the foundation for the content of our class. There are a whole lot of resources on the links there that point you to thinking about place-based education, taking advantage of where the student is in this place and time as a springboard for understanding our content. So strategies for meaningful experiences are, of course, we figure out who our students are, what motivates them to learn, and what their goals and unique needs are. We communicate and we draw connections to the why behind learning goals. We involve students in setting personal goals and developing strategies to achieve them. We show students how the learning targets relate to things they care about, and we incorporate student voice, choice, and agency as often as possible. And the last strategy that I'll kind of speed through is about making learning visible. John Hattie's book, Visible Learning for Teachers, presents a wealth of information about visible learning, and that's on the next slide when you get a chance. He talks about many of the things that we've gone over here today, but I found the pedagogy of visible learning for teachers most closely matched my online teacher needs, because what he talked about was, how do we make learning plain? How do we make sure that teachers see it, that students see it, and that our community sees it? And if you see on the next slide, we can do this partly by backwards planning. Backwards planning says, first we ask ourselves, what is it that students need to know or be able to do? And then we decide, what will make that learning visible? What will I see from the student that shows me that they learned it or they were able to do it? And this is what I have to rely on in an online class. Whereas a face-to-face class, I can walk around the room, I can monitor their learning, I can see it as it develops. But in an online class, I'm more depending on these really visible markers of success. So I first ask myself, what will I see in order to know that the student learned this thing? And then I want to ask, what will they show me? And then I develop the success criteria for that product, for what they will show me. And then I design a lesson that allows that student to show me their success. So again, I look at the end first and decide, how can a student show me visibly what they know or be able to do?
Can I add in there, Kelly, just a moment? In the dance classroom, I love doing that with creating a final combination first and then breaking it down into those smaller components and the essential elements that they really need to understand in order to achieve that final combination or phrase that we're going to learn. So dance teachers, you can definitely take that and adapt it to your teaching.
Awesome. And then part of that visible learning is checking for understanding early and often, that the structures we put in place for feedback, and that feedback could be student to teacher or student to student, those are really important, especially in online learning. And I'm going to give some examples in the next section where we look at my class. So I'm going to skip ahead to the next section. So just a few summaries from that previous section, but we're going to go ahead and skip ahead to the lesson structure. So I'm going to share a structure that I developed for my online classes, and then I'm going to give specific examples. So I'm starting a little bit general, and then I'm going to get very specific. Before that, I first want to say that I believe sharing visual art examples is relevant for all of our classes, whether you are a teacher of visual art or other areas. And I would ask you try not to get caught up in the content of the lesson itself, but consider the structure and the purpose of the lesson. And so, again, I know that I'm giving visual art examples. That's what my experience was in. It's what I'm able to offer. But really, this is about breaking down the learning in a structure that works for online class. And when I started in this work, I couldn't find anyone else who was teaching art this way. And so I had to look at examples from science and from English and from math and to see what worked for them and then adapt it for what I thought would work for me. I'm going to ask you to go back one to 62. The first part of my lesson structure was that I started with the content of the lesson. This would be beginning with the learning concepts through readings or videos or presentations. And then I had students go on to a discussion, which is the next slide. And this was their first check for understanding. And it allowed students to post what they learned from that lesson content in the beginning and then reply to two classmates. So they were checking that knowledge with one another and they were engaging with one another for that check for understanding before I even came to the table. And then the third part was about a formative assessment. And in my class, at least my Art 1 class, this was in the form of a sketchbook assignment, but it could be any kind of demonstration, low stakes, where they are showing you what they learned or practicing or experimenting with something. So students should show creativity, they could have a lot of personal expression and they could take risks and they could have fun. But in the end, I'm looking to see if they understand what the concept was of that lesson before we get to a finished product. Students in my class would take photographs of their work to submit it. And then we'd go on to a project. Students would show off their skills and ideas through these projects. There would be open-ended prompts that led students to show me what they could know or be able to do related to the standards and to the objectives of that lesson. And these would all come with rubrics. I would have an assessment rubric for each of these sections that was really very similar from week to week, so that they knew what to expect, especially by that third or fourth week. They knew exactly what was expected in order to be successful at that project. And then the last part was a reflection of learning, where students were explaining their thinking or telling me how they went through the process of learning the content for that week. And that would always be prompted with questions that were specific to that lesson. And notice that, my assessment here is not tests or quizzes or multiple choice. This was all students engaging and practicing and being and physically active in the class and then showing me and explaining to me what they were thinking and learning throughout the process. So now I'm going to go through some very specific examples. These are little tidbits. There's certainly a lot more that went into posting these. Of course, it was clear and concise, but I just want to give you some kind of quick samples that help just kind of drive home the points I'm trying to make about the structure for online learning. So the first one, this was an introduction to art analysis. I think in some form or another, we are all looking at the elements of our art form and helping students understand them. So for students, we had an online textbook. It was a McGraw-Hill Art Talk textbook. That's not an endorsement for that particular textbook, but it's the one that I happen to use in my class. I think that I could do this class without the textbook now. I think there are enough online resources that I could point students to. What I liked about those readings was that they were concise, they were age appropriate, and they came with visuals to kind of back up the concepts of the text. And then next, I had some videos from Khan Academy that sort of drove those points home. These were just some videos that it kind of gave an example of somebody talking through their art analysis of these particular paintings. And then we got to a discussion where students were able to choose an artwork. We had an image gallery that they could choose one from, or they could look online if they wanted to, and they had to describe the artwork. So I have the student response there, and students had to reply to two classmates about what did you notice about the painting that may have been missed by the original student. So it sort of furthered that discussion and that analysis of that painting. And then they had a sketchbook assignment. So here was our formative assessment. They had to create this was the first lesson of the class where they created a name tag to that was connected visually to the elements of the painting they chose. So this was the one that the student did. And then we didn't have a project this particular week. We were still kind of getting started. So I had them reflect on their work and explain to me the connections between the product they created and the original image from the art gallery. And throughout this whole lesson, I was able to assess their learning and how well they're making connections, how well they're identifying elements and principles, and how carefully they're looking at what the art is that we're looking at in the class. The next example, we were doing a unit on how artists create depth in a composition. And the first part of this, like before, was to explain the content. I recorded myself giving a PowerPoint presentation. It had examples of paintings, it had examples from video game environments and from popular movies where there were artists that were creating a sense of distance in space. And so I talked through the different strategies that artists use to create that sense of distance. And then next, students explored landscape paintings from different times and places, and they were asked to find one they love. They shared that painting and then they explained what strategies the artist used, give the specific examples that that artist used to create that sense of depth in the composition, whether it's overlapping or making things lighter or higher in the composition as they go back in space. And students could choose from the kinds of imagery that they really love. There's no limit on whether it needed to be a traditional landscape painting, which a lot of students love, or it could have been a more anime kind of inspired or game environment. So there are lots of possibilities for students to hook in to the kind of artwork that they're drawn to. And then next we had two sketchbook assignments. The first was where just in pencil, they needed to show me that they could establish depth in a composition. So they did 3 thumbnail sketches. It needed to have a foreground, middle ground, and background, and use the correct, devices that artists use to create depth. And then next I had them do some value studies with acrylic paint. They did just one color of white and black. I did give them a supply packet at the beginning of the year that had all supplies for the year. And that's something that I was able to do in that class environment. I know supplies are a big question for next year. If you were in a hybrid model, you might do that previous assignment at home and this one in class. Lots of solutions to come up with for how students could use materials this year. But here's where they were showing me how they could create light and dark with paint and then how they blend those colors together. I just want to see that they can have some confidence doing this. Before we move to a painting, I want them to build the confidence and the fluency as an artist to go right into developing ideas in the next painting that we did. So we did a painting after this. It was their formative assignment where they had to establish depth in a composition and use tints and shades of a color. So it's the combination of the previous learning and again, they could hook into the kinds of subject matter and the kinds of landscapes that would most interest them. This class really enjoyed just kind of a traditional landscape. So there's this example and then one on the next slide also. And then I may have the reflection of learning on the next slide. Nope. I'm going to go into my digital class. For my last year of teaching online, I did have a digital media and graphic design class. We used all free programs that you didn't need a subscription for that were online. Again, I don't want to give endorsements because we don't give endorsements at the state level for certain products, but I will say that I used a program called Vector and Pixlr. So I'm going to show lesson 6 to you. And again, this was from my digital media class. We started with a video, so here's the content, and then I had them explore just some abstract expressionist artworks, artists that use shape to communicate ideas. Go back for just a second. Sorry, I want to look at that one again. They had a discussion about abstract expressionism. They had a video demonstration that I had done, and then a mini project. And the point of this project was really just to break it down. They had never used the program before, so I needed to see that they could make shapes and that they could change the color, that they could change the outline if they needed to, or they could change the type of shapes. So it's really simple. It doesn't have a whole lot of deep connections. Did the best I could on that one, but really for this one, it was as simple as I want to see shapes in your composition. I want to see that you can create a file, you can put shapes on the file, and you can turn in the file. And it was as simple as that. Beefed it up a little bit with the abstract expressionism, but they did not love that. But the questions I asked, and I always posted these essential questions at the beginning of the week, but how do I create variety of shapes in the vector creation program, and how do I use those shapes as a tool for expression and communication? So the next slide shows just my class example again. I just needed to see some shapes on the page and then they could turn it in correctly, and it was as simple as that. But now that they can do that, we can move on. So the next lesson went through using just a little more complicated. Now we're adding shapes together or taking shapes away from one another in order to create an illustration. So after a discussion where they shared their artwork from the previous week, they did a video tutorial on shape building, and then they did a mini project called a rounded rectangle creature. We had essential questions for the week. Again, I wanted them to know what they should know or be able to do, and then reflect on their learning with the guiding questions. And so the next slide shows you some examples from the class. These were two examples. So now students aren't just sticking shapes on the page, but they can add shapes to one another. They can take shapes away from one another, and they're starting to get some shapes and some interest in their animals. And this was the formative assessment, and now we're into the summative. I gave a lot more choice on this one. That previous lesson showed me that they were capable of kind of building a simple illustration, and now I want to see where they would like to take it. And so I gave them 3 project options, and each option had a set of examples with it and some tutorial videos that I found online. They could create a self-portrait or a character or a landscape. They could have gone a little more into abstract work, but they did not love that, so they I didn't have any take that option. But they showed me their steps of the design process. This was not as simple as giving a choice board and saying, here are your options. I still want to guide students through the process of creating an artwork, because that's supporting them and making sure along the way that they're on the right track. And so what they did was just research and brainstorming for their idea. They posted that on the discussion board so they could share that with the class and get some feedback. And then they created their work and then got feedback again off of that work. So again, the essential questions are: how do artists and designers use shapes to communicate? How do illustrators use shapes as the building blocks for an illustration? How do designers use the steps of the design process, which we had talked about in a previous week? And how do I demonstrate creativity and originality in the creation of my project? I wanted to see agency and voice in the creation of this product. So there are a few examples on the next slide. Some students went the kind of character route. Some students like things that were a little more cutesy. The middle one was a self-portrait. Then the alien was an inspired character that could have worked in a game environment. Then the next example is one I pulled from online. They really loved characters, so I didn't get a lot of landscapes. I just pulled this example from a random website. But it's a way that students could build shapes, a landscape just using the shapes there. And then just to kind of wrap it all together, I know that not all of you identify with every single one of these lessons, but I do want to show you how an online teacher can break down the creative process and break down some arts lessons. I hope that you will share your strategies and your lesson ideas that you have learned and seen success with over the past few months. And one of the other exciting questions for online learning might be, what is more possible with remote learning that you couldn't do before? And some teachers are talking about how they can engage guests from far away, and they can engage students with technology in a way that they had never had possible before this period of time. So there are challenges, but there are also possibilities. I thank you for letting me share some of the work that I did with my students and be with you today. I'd be happy to respond to questions that you have, and I'm going to turn the controls back over to Brandon and Sayward. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Kelly. That was amazing and super informative. We did have a question in the chat box. Someone asked what supplies you included in your kit for them, and if you had a list of that, or you could talk about that, either one.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share it. So students, have a $25 materials fee in my division at that time, which was about the budget that I had per student. I had a set of acrylic paints, just like, those really simple set of colors. I had some India ink, an eraser and a drawing pencil, obviously, a sketchbook. We did some metal work where they did repoussé and chasing on metal. So it was a whole year's worth of supplies that I was able to kind of pack within that. I only had a few students. I never had more than a dozen. So if you're doing this school-wide, that's going to look very different. But that's how I approached it with the students that I had.
Wonderful. Does anyone else have any questions for Kelly? You can feel free to drop them in the chat, or we're just about out of time. We're gonna wrap up here, but if you want to stay on for any additional questions, you're more than welcome to do that. But I want to go ahead and get people their survey in case they need to head out here. All right, so we really want you to leave today thinking about, or you can share in the chat with us, what's got you excited about thinking about planning for the fall? Like, what did you take from today that's really got you, oh my gosh, I really want to try that. What are you going to do now? Type some things into the chat and share with us, what did you get from today and what are some ideas this is making you think about? Great, we're seeing the ideas of maybe instrument kits, supply kits, use this process to set up in Canvas. I can use my real lessons and not filler sub-like lessons. Exactly.
Absolutely. Please use the standards.
Yes. Now have more defined starting point regarding building my online lesson plans. That's exactly what we were hoping for today. So amazing.
Jamil, you will love the fact that we're going to roll out a Bitmoji classroom PD later in August as well.
Yeah. Love the idea of connecting with your students, simplifying and the structure for you and for the students. There's so many great things in here. So keep sharing because this is going to get shared in this slide deck. We'll share all of these things with you. And we just wanted to make sure that you had that. We're also going to be dropping you a link in just a moment. That's a Google form that you can fill out with specific lesson plan ideas or ideas that you have that you want to share with each other. And so it's a great form that you can just add in some things in there to share with each other. And we'll get that all sent out to you as well in a bit. So here is where you're going to find the survey for today that you click on. You fill out that survey. It'll give us some feedback. It'll let us know that you were there. And then that's how you're going to get your certificate to be able to take to your principals to get your credit for today. Okay, so just make sure that you fill that survey out for us. It helps us in planning for the future as well, because it does ask for additional ideas. And Brandon's got that in the chat for you, so you can go ahead and click on that link. You will get that email to you later today as well. So don't panic if you don't get it right away. You will get it in your email.
Teresa, I don't know if you were here earlier, but in the slide deck earlier on, NCMEA just released that they're going to do an 8-webinar series for free for music teachers and tech. So lots of music teacher ideas there, and we are definitely, unfortunately, with over 7,000 arts teachers in the state, trying to meet the needs of everybody at once. So you know, these things are easily adaptable. Instead of a sketchbook, it's a rough draft of a performance. Instead of looking at a piece of art, it's watching other performances. But the idea of that structure and the discussion forum, those happen no matter what. I taught, general music, and I taught music appreciation and music theory online, and those were the exact same sorts of things that we did as well.
And here's our email so that you can contact us if you have any further questions or further needs. If you have things that you would really love to see professional development on, we're happy to hear from you about that. But we're also having a lot of teachers and educators reach out to us about facilitating professional development. So if there's a topic that you feel really strongly and comfortable sharing and teaching other teachers about, we would love your input and collaboration there. So feel free to reach out to us with any of that information. And again, we're so happy to have Kelly here with us today. She is the coordinator for is it Fine Arts Correct. Yeah. Coordinator for Fine Arts in Virginia. And so she basically has our role, but in Virginia. But personally, she is a former fine arts teacher who's taught online. And so she does focus on the visual arts because that's the background that she has. That's the experience that she has to be able to share with you all. And so we're really fortunate to have her here to speak with us today. And so thank Kelly for joining us. We thank all of you for coming, and we hope that you'll join us for many more of our sessions coming up. We have quite a bit coming up before the school year starts. If you do all of them, you could get your full 10 hours in, which is a full CEU. So just keep a lookout for those. We're sharing as many other professional development workshops as we can from other organizations, like Brandon said, with the music educators. And so as many of those as we can get to you, we will. One more, I see another question here. Don't know if I filled out the survey for the last one the day of. Yes, they all will come in the email. All right. So once again, thank you so much for being here, and thank Kelly for being here as well. We hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and try to stay calm and excited about planning for the fall. We wish you a wonderful, wonderful beginning of the year.
Yes, definitely. Stay safe.
Hear me?
We can.
I don't see the survey. I clicked on it and it didn't show up.
If I type that in, this is exactly what you should see.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
This was great.
Thank you so much.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
I missed the one on the 16th. I think it was the 16th.
It was the 14th.
And I was wondering, can I go to the archives and see it?
Yep. Right here. It's the first one, the Canvas for Arts Educator Archive. And even if you just go to our homepage, it says right here that you can see the webinar archive for recording and materials, and you can just click there and it'll take you right over there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
And so we are officially done for today, but if any of you, like I said, have any further questions or want to just chat a little bit further, you're welcome to go ahead and unmute and ask anything that you would like. Or you can put it in the chat and we'll ask if you'd rather do that and not unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Are there any resources for students with special needs, our ELL students, that we can use as we're planning for online learning?
What specifically are you looking for? Like modified and adapted tools, or are you looking just to make sure that you are compliant?
Both. I didn't know if North Carolina had an official document for fine arts or, for us. So just curious if there was something already out there that I could research and look over.
So, I mean, we always say that you need to follow all the guidelines for ELLs or 504s or IEPs, any of that. I will tell you that so arts education does not have a separate document from the Lighting the Way document of the school board. However, underneath our resources tab, we have linked here underneath the COVID-19 arts ed resources. This is all of the resources from the field. So this is our professional organizations and DHHS and the National Scholastics Association for Athletics and Arts. Everything that they've published is here. At least I hope. I'm trying to keep it as updated as possible. And so all of your documents are hopefully here. But if you do have a specific question, please reach out to us, and we will reach out to our fellow teammates in ELL or in EL or in those other EC areas to find you the right answer.
Yeah, we have a recorded webinar in Virginia I'd be happy to pass along that's about working with our EL students in fine arts classes, and she does a really good job about giving specific strategies for each of our fine arts areas. I'd be happy to share that if you want to email me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful, Kelly. Thank you. So Kelly's email again was at the end of the slide deck. You should be able to find that. And there she is. She dropped it into the chat there for you.
It's actually something that's on our to-do list, so I will definitely be picking your brain some more later, Kelly. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.